the World of RPGs, bonus episode 4, Warhammer Conference. Welcome to the World of RPGs, a podcast in which we travel around the globe and learn about the local role-playing game scenes. I'm your host Mo Bartz, and in this bonus episode, I talk about the Warhammer Conference. Yes, you heard that right. So in September 2024, the inaugural Warhammer Conference, organized by Lancaster University in the UK and Heidelberg University from Germany, happened in Heidelberg. The venue is at one of the oldest universities in Europe and in a beautiful old part of town. Obviously, most of the presentations and the keynotes were about Games Workshop's miniature games and not about TTRPGs, but a few talks on role-playing snuck in since there's obviously some overlap. For example, the first Warhammer Fantasy battle rules were actually called Rules for a Mass Combat Fantasy Role-Playing Game. And you might already know that Dungeons & Dragons itself came out of wargaming. There's also a Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing Game now in its 4th edition, and we've talked about it in some episodes, especially the Poland one. The Warhammer 40k universe has a couple of more recent TTRPGs. To find out more about the conference, I talked to one of the organizers.
My name is Dr. Mike Ryder. I'm a lecturer at Lancaster University. My background is very much in science fiction and philosophy, though I now work in a marketing department where I look at things like consumer culture, I look at digital marketing, social media, and all sorts of other related things.
And you're also a gamer, so how did you get into that hobby and what do you play?
Wow, yes. So I've been gaming for at least 20 years, maybe 25 years now. So I remember getting into initially Warhammer 40,000, Warhammer 40k. I got into that in the 1990s. I remember just seeing this shop full of cool, interesting things and being drawn towards it. So I used to collect model miniatures, like model aeroplanes, tanks and things. And I then just discovered there's this whole world out there where actually you can make cool science fiction tanks and planes and warriors and knights and things. And so I very much got into it from the modelling side of things. But then over the years, as that area of hobby has expanded, I very much got into the literature and the lore side of things. And I'm a big fan of Black Library books. I read an awful lot of Black Library books. And my PhD is in science fiction, so I'm very much interested in the material that Games Workshop puts out and also the material of other related sort of universes really as well.
And you were recently the organizer of the first Warhammer conference. Can you maybe say a bit about the conference and how that came to be?
It's an interesting one, really. I've organised quite a few different conferences in my time. And this one is by far, I would say, the most interesting. It's certainly been the most fun to organise. The idea really came out of some frustration I'd had personally within the field of science fiction studies, especially I found, where I think things like Warhammer are kind of sort of looked down upon a little bit, which is odd to say really, because science fiction is quite a geeky and nerdy field in itself. But when it comes to Warhammer, you always feel like a bit of an outsider because you have the people who look at Star Wars and Star Trek and some of the big franchises, but Warhammer kind of isn't given the same sort of attention or sort of credibility within that particular space. And as I've gone through my career and then as I've gone into marketing, especially thinking about Games Workshop's business models and things like that, I thought, why do people not write more about this hobby that I love and that actually I think is quite academically credible and an interesting area of study? So what happened was I then ended up applying for a book. I went to a publisher, I was trying to get a book together, and they essentially turned me down because they said, well, Games Workshop's not big enough. Which, I mean, to your listeners, whether they play Games Workshop hobbies or not, I think it seems mad to think that when you think that this is a company worth £3.5 billion, that's pounds sterling. So, yeah, it just seems insane to me. And so from that, I got into a discussion with someone who had written a blog about Warhammer and philosophy, published on the Routledge website. And it was through those conversations with Thomas Arnold, one of my co-organisers, that we thought, well, why don't we just put on a conference, just test the waters, see how much interest there is out there from the academic community and see if we can use this, hopefully, as a springboard to get the world of academia to take Warhammer more seriously. And before you know it, we're here. We had a conference and we had loads of people come. It's been absolutely fabulous. So I think Initially, we had about 60 people lined up to talk, plus 2 keynote speakers. A few people dropped out on a day or the day before, so I think we ended up at either 52 or 54 speakers in total. Across 2 days, we had about up to 40 people in person and another 40, 50 people online, live at the time, which, by the way, is huge for an academic conference, because I've been to some top talks and I've presented at some top conferences in the field of marketing and business, and you'll be lucky to have 4 or 5 people in a room sometimes. So to have 20 people in a panel session last thing on a Friday and then last thing on a Saturday was absolutely incredible. And the feedback we've had has been really great. So we had lots and lots of positive comments and people complaining that it wasn't a bigger conference. So we're definitely thinking about doing it again next year. It's just a matter of finding the time, space, and maybe see if we can get some funding as well to make it the size of conference that we really want it to be.
So it was a transdisciplinary conference, and I found it interesting for the listeners. I was also presenting there. There were people from philosophy, there were people from pedagogy, there were people from the natural sciences, to use a German term. There were people from the natural sciences, for example, talking about tyrannid biology or talking about using epidemiological modeling on predicting battles and so on. So it was academic, but at the same time, everything was about the hobby. So that turned out quite well, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is one of the things we were hoping to get out of the conference, and absolutely delighted with just the sheer breadth of different topics covered. I think going into it, we weren't sure what sort of applications we would get. I mean, as I say, my own background is science fiction and philosophy. That's what my PhD is in. But then I've also published in educational research, and I publish in reflective practice and sort of things relating to work-based learning as well as marketing. I publish in quite a few different areas. So my colleague Thomas, he's in sort of philosophy. Michael and Philip, they both work as well in the same university, in the same sort of area. So we thought, maybe we'll get a few philosophers come along. But to see the response from, as you say, so many different fields. So not just fields that directly applied to Warhammer and Games Workshop, so like game studies. So we had quite a few people from game studies, which was really interesting. But to have people, like you say, who are sort of epidemiologists, sort of who are using what they do in their own field to apply it to Games Workshop and to the sort of Warhammer hobbies, Warhammer universes, I thought was absolutely fantastic. And it wasn't even just that either. So we had a few, not non-experts, I'd say, but we had a few people who maybe had a sort of particular interest in the hobby or had certain experiences to share that you wouldn't normally see at an academic conference. I mean, just to give 2 highlights, we had one talk from someone who works in the American military. He's an army chaplain. And so he was talking about how he uses Warhammer as a way to help treat post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans. And so he was coming at it very much from a sort of practical, this is what we do with the hobby as a way to help people come to terms with the traumas that they've been dealing with, and as a way to actually encourage people to talk and come together. So that was absolutely fascinating. I was really, really delighted to see that talk. And we also had a talk from Dave Shipley, who actually spent some time in prison and had used Warhammer as a sort of way to come to terms with sort of the trauma of being incarcerated and sort of deal with the struggles of isolation and ultimately to sort of rehabilitate himself. And he's now actually doing research in this area. I think he's at University of Southampton, if I'm right in saying so. So absolutely fantastic sort of range of talks on offer. I think there was something for everyone, certainly.
Yeah, unfortunately, I missed these 2, but they're all posted on YouTube. So I have a link in the show notes so that everyone who listens to this can also check these talks out.
Yeah, check out our YouTube channel. So just search at Warhammer Conference on YouTube and you'll find all of the talks on there.
So that was it for this bonus episode. We kept it short since you can find the presentations from the conference on YouTube.